The United States of America is stopping the supply of weapons and ammunition to Europe and Ukraine because of the war in the Middle East, and US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says that US stockpiles are depleted because of Ukraine. At the same time, it was acknowledged in Europe that air defense stockpiles in the US, Europe, and Middle Eastern countries are almost completely depleted. At the same time, the Pentagon asked the White House to approve an appeal to Congress for more than $200 billion for the war in Iran. And in the annual report of US intelligence agencies on threats to the country, it is stated that Vladimir Putin believes his army continues to seize territory in Ukraine, so he does not intend to stop the war. But in this set of news, there are some topics that definitely need to be broken down to the smallest details.
Чтобы не паниковать. Например,
Pete Hegseth's statement should be interpreted correctly to understand that there is actually a certain benefit for Ukraine in his words, because it concerns massive funding for the Pentagon. And here's a spoiler, Pete Hegseth did not call for stopping the supply of weapons to Ukraine, so let's calmly sort all this out now. My name is Alexei Pichi, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe. Subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and write any comment you want under this video. This really helps the YouTube algorithms recommend this episode to as many viewers as possible. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News, the link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, yesterday, the US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth stated that the United States should use its munitions
исходя из собственных интересов,
and not spend them on Ukraine. He said, quote, "We are still facing the situation created by Joe Biden when military shells were spent not on the needs of our armed forces but sent to Ukraine. At the moment, it is better to use these munitions in our own interests." And many people interpreted Pete Hegseth's statement exactly as an announcement that from now on, the United States of America is stopping the supply of weapons to Europe and Ukraine, since they themselves, for example, need such shells. Well, you could really interpret it that way. Adding fuel to the fire today is also the head of the largest German defense company Rheinmetall, Armin Paperger. He stated that the air defense reserves in the US, Europe, and Middle Eastern countries are almost completely depleted. He emphasized that the demand for missiles and air defense systems is currently enormous and is coming from all regions of the world. Quote, "At the moment, European, American, and Middle Eastern stockpiles are empty or almost empty. If the war in the Middle East lasts another month, I believe we will have almost no missiles left." According to Paperger, this is because modern drones are a relatively cheap means of attack, while countering them requires much more expensive systems. The head of the Rheinmetall Corporation emphasized that effective protection today is only possible by combining different means: missiles, artillery systems, and interceptors. It is this kind of combined model that Rheinmetall will focus on as it increases its investments in production. According to the head of Rheinmetall, the emergence of drones has changed the nature of combat operations, although it has not led to a complete transformation of military approaches. The key remains the integrated use of different types of weapons. And as an example, he cited the experience of the war in Ukraine, pointing to the effective use of drones by the Ukrainian armed forces against the Russian occupation troops. By the way, according to data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, over the past 5 years, European countries have more than tripled their arms imports, accounting for 33% of all global deliveries. Almost half of the imported weapons in Europe are produced in the United States, and exports to Europe have increased by 217% over the past 5 years. And I'm not telling you this information for no reason. And here we return once again to Pete Hegseth's statement that the US supposedly shouldn't waste shells and weapons on Ukraine. And let's pause here and analyze everything carefully. First, it's vital to quickly grasp the context of these statements. The Pentagon approached the White House with a request to approve an appeal to Congress for more than $200 billion for the war in Iran. This is a huge amount, and of course it raised questions. Hegseth was asked about the $200 billion, like why is such a large amount needed? For what purpose? And here is the most important part. Pete Hegseth replied that, among other things, this money is needed to replenish the stockpiles that were depleted during the transfer of weapons to Ukraine, which, by the way, is true. And by the way, this confirms that Joe Biden wasn't handing out weapons, just a little at a time, but in rather large quantities. And now I will give you Pete Hegseth's quote in full. Not taken out of context, but in full, so you understand the whole context. Quote, "We need money to kill bad guys, so we're going to Congress to make sure we're properly funded, to make sure our ammunition is replenished, and not just replenished, but even more than that. We need such investments to say, look, we will replenish everything that was used, and now we are reviving our military-industrial complex, restoring the arsenal of freedom. Our unique weapons will be restored faster than anyone can imagine. We are still dealing with the environment created by Joe Biden, which depleted our stockpiles and sent them not to our army but to Ukraine. Every time we look at where our difficulties come from, it all comes down to the fact that it was sent to Ukraine. In the end, it's better to use these munitions in our own interests at this moment. And this $200 billion bill will ensure that everything is properly funded." Period. What do we have? First of all, I'll say right away that Pete Hegseth is of course being disingenuous when he says that what is being supplied to Ukraine can be used in a war against Iran. It can't, because artillery doesn't work right now. The Americans don't use the aerial bombs that are being supplied to Ukraine. Tomahawks, which are used to bomb Iran, are not being supplied to Ukraine. That's why there are different weapons here. But in this case, if you listen to this quote from Pete Hegseth, you could of course nitpick at the phrase Joe Biden sent everything to Ukraine. But there's no point in that, well, unless you're just trying to nitpick something. Accelerating the rearmament of the US through new funding packages from Congress, including this $200 billion package, benefits absolutely everyone, including Ukraine. Because there will be more ammunition that the US can sell, Europe can buy it and transfer it to Ukraine. Pete Hegseth not only says we'll replenish our stockpiles beyond previous levels, but also that we're reviving the military-industrial complex to quickly mass-produce these weapons. Pete Hegseth, I didn't just mention percentages for no reason. Pete Hegseth understands perfectly well that over the last 5 years they've increased arms sales to Europe by 217%. These are huge contracts. This is a lot of money. And it's not about just saying, that's it, we're not selling to anyone, we're not giving anything to anyone. Plus, don't forget that the US under Trump doesn't give anything to Ukraine for free. It's exclusively sales through Europe. That's it. That's it. And let me remind you that in October 2025, Joe Hegseth called on Europe to buy more weapons for Ukraine, specifically from the United States of America. So let them finance more, produce more, and sell more. That is, the problem is exaggerated, in my opinion, because Hegseth needed to somehow justify his huge demands. Well, $200 billion for the war is a lot. Congress will ask why. He'll say we need to replenish our stockpiles because Biden gave everything to the Ukrainians. But really, he's saying we need to produce. So the problem is exaggerated, right? And no one even mentioned that Ukraine would no longer get anything. That never happened. But the problem here is different. A war against Iran could completely distract not only the US but also Europe from the war in Ukraine. The annual US intelligence report on threats to the country states that Vladimir Putin believes his army continues to seize territory in Ukraine, so he does not intend to stop the war. And at the end of this episode, I'll give a long quote from that very US intelligence report on threats to the country. Moscow most likely still believes that it will achieve victory on the battlefield and force a peace agreement on its own terms. But the continuation of the war could lead to it escalating into a larger conflict with NATO, up to and including a threat to the United States itself. Moscow's repeated threats to use nuclear weapons and its combat use of dual-capable intermediate-range ballistic missiles in Ukraine create the risk that a regional conflict could turn into an existential threat to the United States of America. In this situation, do you think the United States of America is interested in completely stopping the supply of weapons to Ukraine or not? I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful and you want to support the work of our YouTube channel, you can do so financially through any donation, subscription, or sponsorship on YouTube. It's very easy to do. All the links and details are in the description of this video. You can either use the button under this video to subscribe and become a sponsor, or use the QR code on your screen. This is the most convenient way to support our channel with a one-time donation. I will be grateful for any support you can give. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.